research series completely free and online. We hope that a lot of people benefit from it, and as we proudly honor the core values of FCCU, specifically our commitment to diversity and service to the wider global community. Over the years, we have been working to synchronize our sessions with the Whittier Researcher Development Framework, RDF. As many of you may know, the RDF was reconfigured recently in 2025. Considering this refiguration, our current series of 24 webinars is as follows. It has a strong coverage of the RDF domains of researcher values and behaviors, research methods and digital literacy, ethical and responsible research, scholarly communication and publication, as well as collaborative research culture. At the same time, it only offers a limited coverage of the funding and finance, formal project management, supervision and people management, coaching and mentoring, and research translation or commercialization domains. So because we aim to be precise in our alignment, we hope that you can target your own professional development effectively. This brings us to our fourth session in the series, the webinar on systematic retrieval, advanced search strategies for multidisciplinary research. This demonstration session explains essential themes for effectively navigating the e-library. We will deep dive into advanced search strategies using keywords, Boolean operators, and other sophisticated techniques. We will also cover practical strategies to evaluate information sources, explain the concept of cited reference, and unlock the real power sharing capabilities of Google Scholar. The global interest in mastering these search mechanics has been massive. For the session today, we have more than 8,000 registrations, including from more than 400 international universities and at least 230 above local national universities. Right now, we have more than 500 participants already in the Zoom room, and as the number of participants exceeds beyond 1,000, the rest of the audience will automatically be steered towards our live streaming link. It is now my distinct privilege to introduce our esteemed resource person for today, Anthea Sutton. Dr. Anthea Sutton, welcome to the session. Dr. Sutton is a senior research fellow at the School of Medicine and Population Health at the University of Sheffield, UK. She's professionally trained as an information specialist, has contributed her expertise to over 100 review projects. She specializes in designing and conducting systematic literature searches, evidence retrieval, including the often elusive gray literature and reference management. Dr. Sutton has uniquely developed a typology of reviews with a specific focus on evidence retrieval requirements, significantly contributing to the methodological understanding of the systematic reviewing process. Many of you may know her as the co-author of the highly acclaimed textbook, Systematic Approaches to a Successful Literature Review, published by Sage, and it is now in its landmark 4th edition. Furthermore, she is deeply involved in teaching a wide range of online courses dedicated to search strategies and systematic literature review workflows. Dr. Sutton, we are incredibly fortunate to have you to share your expertise with us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks. That was a really kind introduction. Yeah, when you hear everything you've done, it's a little bit like, wow. So yeah, I'm delighted to be here today. It's really nice to be invited. Yes, I'm joining you from the UK. So I'm at the University of Sheffield, which is in the north of England. We're experiencing a heat wave at the moment, which is very unusual for us. So yeah, wasn't quite expecting to be coming to you from such a warm place today, but there we go. Right, so to get started, I will just share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'll just put it on slideshow. Hopefully everyone can see my slides and hear me and see the video. Yeah, so as Adkus said, we're here today to talk about systematic information retrieval, specifically around the sort of advanced search techniques we might use. I'm going to talk about sort of multidisciplinary research. I'm aware everyone here will have their different research fields. I work in the School of Medicine and Population Health at the University of Sheffield. But a lot of the work we do does cross disciplines. We do a lot of public health work. So yeah, the example I'm going to talk about is a project I worked on, but it did have a lot of different disciplines involved. So that's kind of going to be the focus of the session. So yes, a little bit more about me. So my work at Sheffield, I'm essentially an information specialist. I trained as a librarian and started working in the research library at the School of Health, as it was then called, and quickly started working on a lot of evidence synthesis projects. So you may be familiar with systematic reviews. And essentially that work involves conducting very structured and transparent and reproducible searches in order to try and find as much of the evidence on a particular subject that you can find. So we aim to be very comprehensive in our searches. And over the years, we've kind of developed our thinking and, how we teach our students in that even if your end goal isn't a systematic review, you can still use those techniques and approaches to your research because any kind of research, it's good for us to be methodological and transparent and be able to reproduce our methods. So essentially, everything we do really now is based on that sort of systematic approach that we use to finding the literature. So a brief plan for the sessions today. So we're going to start a little bit about taking it back to the beginning and thinking about how we might structure a research question in order to help us develop that systematic search. We'll talk about Boolean logic, so how we combine search terms, some specifics around sort of syntax we might use. This obviously does vary a little bit per database or repository that you're searching, but yeah, the key principles, we will talk about those. A lot of our work at Sheffield is around this idea of trying to balance the precision of our searches with the recall. As I said, a lot of the time we're trying to be as comprehensive as possible, but we do need to be precise enough that our researchers aren't sort of looking through thousands and thousands of references just to find, a few pieces of literature that will answer their question. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Most of the session will be around database searching, but we also, in order to be comprehensive, do some supplementary search techniques to find things that wouldn't necessarily be contained in bibliographic databases. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then we'll get onto the demonstration bit. We're going to focus on sources that are open access, so available to everybody. I'm sure you will have things that you are able to access through your institution. I know we do at Sheffield. But yeah, for the purpose of today, we're going to focus on those open access sources. We'll talk about citation tracking. And then we're going to do a little bit of sort of future gazing at the end. I don't think you can talk about searching these days without touching on how AI may help us. And then we'll talk about the sort of critical evaluation of what we find. So that's basically the plan today. Excuse me one moment. I also have terrible hay fever. So I just need to put that out. Thank you. So taking it back then right to the beginning, our research question. So we usually start with an idea. It might not be fully formulated in our mind just yet. So we might think, I want to do some research, and bringing in this idea that I talked about at the beginning, this intergenerational project that I worked on. So we might think to ourselves, I want to do some research on different age groups coming together, so older and younger people, sharing ideas, maybe doing some activities together, learning from each other, and how that might be done and how the impact of that might help those different age groups. So as you can see at the moment, this is it's a good idea, but it's not very formulated in terms of what exactly we will search for. Obviously, if we just literally typed that into an academic database, I think we would either get a bit of a mess of results. There might be a lot of results, and it might be difficult for us to identify the kind of useful things to answer our questions, or we might get absolutely nothing. So we're going to have to do a bit of thinking about how we would actually structure this into a workable search strategy. So yeah, where do I start is our question. So the concept of having a good question isn't a new thing. If you look in the literature, there's lots of quotes around this type of thing. John Ruskin in the sort of Victorian era stated that you should be able to ask, if you ask a question clearly, that's 2/3 of the way to getting it answered. The NASA mathematician Katherine Johnson attributed her success to getting to the root of the question. And the final one is one we often use when we're talking about systematic reviews. This idea that fuzzy questions, so questions that aren't very clear, will lead to an unclear answer. So yeah, if you look in the literature, there's lots around how the question is basically the key thing to finding out the answer. So yeah, I always bear that in mind when I'm talking about literature searching. So why is it important then to have that clearly defined research question? So it's basically, if you think about it as being the compass of your research, it's how you're going to find your way around the literature. A good question will directly inform the search terms that you use, because in thinking about your question, you'll start to think about the different ways that people might express the same concepts in the literature. It helps you decide what's going to be useful and what isn't useful. So by having a really clear question, you know the scope of what you're looking for, and it stops you. We have this concept of scope creep, where you might find something interesting and think, oh, actually, I'll look at that. But if you go back to your original question, you might think, oh, actually, that although that's interesting, that doesn't actually answer the question that I'm looking to answer. Particularly when we're looking at multidisciplinary research, it allows us to think through the different terminology that different research fields might use. So for example, in our example, literature from education might talk about intergenerational learning, but a medical journal might talk about the setting and might talk about co-located geriatric care. So the idea of, which has happened in the UK, putting nursing homes and nurseries for children in the same complex so that the older people and the younger people come together. A well-defined question will get you to think of all those different ways that the same concept might be described across disciplines. Also, a time at the beginning defining your question is going to save you time and effort later on. Essentially, if we don't know what we're looking for, how are we going to find it? So let's revisit our research question. So we said we wanted to do some research on different age groups, coming together, sharing ideas, activities, etc. So what we need to do then is to think about this question in its key concepts. And the first step we normally do is try and pull the question apart and put it into the key concepts which is going to help our search. So for this question, our first concept is different age groups. We've got this concept of people coming together. That's obviously very broad. It's not very clearly defined. Coming together could mean lots of things. It might mean a family reunion. It might be an event. So different age groups is quite broad. Which age groups are we interested in? And that idea of people getting together also is not very clearly defined. So we need to think a bit further about this. So for the first concept, we're interested in older and younger people, those two distinct groups. For the coming together, we might think in terms of social activities. So you can see already that's much more specific. So we're getting better, we're getting nearer a clear question. So as this is a real piece of research that we did, I will show you our research question that we came up with. So we were looking at the impact of intergeneral interventions on specifically the well-being of younger and older people. So already you can see this is much more defined. We have our concept of the younger and older people. Our concept of people getting together is intergenerational interventions. And you do actually see that as a term in the literature, which is what we found when we started sort of scoping this project. And then our concept 3 is the impact of what that has on the people taking part. So we were particularly interested in looking at social and mental well-being. So just to show you that as a diagram. So if you think we've got our 3 concepts, we've got younger and older people, intergenerational interventions, and social and mental well-being. And the bit we're interested in is that bit in the middle where these 3 things cross over. We're not interested in everything about younger and old people. We're not interested in everything about well-being. We're not interested in everything about intergeneral interventions. The research we are interested in covers all those 3 things together. Now, when we're doing searching, obviously, we need to think about all the different ways that people might describe the same concept. So we're still talking about our search in terms of its 3 concepts, and we start to think about the different ways that this might be expressed. So as you can see, for younger and older people, we have children, we have elderly, youth, etc. For intergenerational, we had things where things were actually described as that, but we also looked for the types of activities people might do. So it was things like reading, music, games, volunteering, mentoring, that type of thing. And then the concept of well-being was around life satisfaction, a sense of belonging, community engagement. We looked for positive things, but we also needed to look at the negative aspects. So the things that the intergenerational intervention might be designed to combat. So things like isolation and loneliness. So we needed to look at both sides of those, because some authors might say, oh, intergenerational programs and the effect on social support. But other authors might talk in terms of intergenerational programs to combat loneliness, for example. So that needs quite a bit of thinking through. Now, when we come to combining those search terms, we use Boolean logic, which is basically using the terms or and to combine searches together. So if we look at or, that's where we combine all our different synonyms within the same concept. So we're looking for any of those terms. And that, when we talk about recall and precision, if we're using or, that's a very broad search. It's a very sensitive search. We will likely get a high number of results. Then when we come to combine our 3 concepts together, we will use and, because we want all those 3 concepts to be present in the literature that we find. And that's a much more precise search. So you'll see that numbers will start to come down once you start combining your concepts with and. How this might look in reality. You can see we've got the first concept of the population. I haven't done all the terms here because it's a really long search strategy. If you're interested, I do have the reference to the project, so you can look at that. So yeah, we combine within our concept with or. So we want any of these terms, and then we come to combine the three together. We use and. So we're interested in only the research that is about the old and young people, the intergenerational contact, and the well-being idea. So I talked a little bit about the syntax we might be able to use. So there's basically lots of search tips we can use. Things like truncation and wildcards. So to save us typing out every single example of something. So instead of having to type child, children, we can use an asterisk and the databases will search for all the different endings on that word. That's called truncation. The wildcard version is the one with the question mark. So if it's something that differs in the middle of a word, like women or woman, you can use a question mark. Exact phrase searching is really useful, putting things in quotation marks so that it's searching for that exactly as it appears. That stops databases looking for the terms like in different places. You can search with proximity. A lot of databases have the opportunity to use an operator like near. So you could say, I want this word within so many words as this word. Again, that helps with precision. Searching in specific fields like titles, abstracts versus searching for all fields. Obviously, title and abstract is more precise. And then things like limiting by date or language or types of research can help you manage the literature. Okay, so yes, as I talked about, precision versus recall. So precision is basically relevance, the proportion of the records that you achieve to help you answer your research question. So a search that had high precision would have fewer irrelevant records to look at. Recall is the opposite. That's comprehensiveness, so the proportion of all existing records that your search has found. And something that had high recall would have all or nearly all of the relevant records. And we're always trying to achieve a balance between those things, depending on what we're doing and how comprehensive we need to be. I mentioned supplementary searching. So some of the things we might do as well as database searching is things like citation searching. If we find a really useful paper, we might look at the references they've cited to see if there's further research that we haven't already identified. If we know there's key authors that write about this field, we might specifically search for their papers. If there's key journals that we know, so for the intergenerational project, there is actually a journal all about that. And we might, we say hand search, which historically would have been going into a library and literally looking at the paper copies of journals. Now we tend to talk about it in relation to going to the journal websites and looking at the most recent issues of a journal. And this is because databases tend to have a time lag of when things are added. So you might find the very new stuff by looking at the journals specifically. Grey literature, always difficult by its nature. We would usually identify some maybe websites from organizations that we might search for sort of reports that wouldn't be indexed in databases. And we also ask people, so we might ask colleagues who've worked in the area, topic experts, if people know of any literature. So basically a method to check that we're finding all the relevant information. This is just to show you what I mean by grey literature. So this is from our intergenerational project. And as you can see, we searched lots of different websites. We were aware that there might be sort of charity reports and things like that. So yeah, we did a lot of grey literature searching in that project because the nature of the topic called for it. So in terms of thinking about sources then, so we're going to focus on open access research portals. I think we're really lucky now that we have a lot of this. When I first started working in health research, we were mainly restricted to things we could access via our institution. Open access, you know, was very early on. So I think we're really lucky now that we can access lots of things for free. So a few, I mean, there's loads. You probably come across lots yourself, but a few we wanted to mention is the base search engine. So that's an open access web resource. I think it's one of the biggest, as you can see, it indexes over 400 million records. The core repository, so that basically brings in information from lots of different repositories into one place. I think it also looks at preprint servers, open access journals. Again, really huge, over 400 million open access articles. And then there's the directory of open access books, which has over 100,000 open access academic books and peer-reviewed monographs. So yeah, they're all really good places to search. There's a couple of places where they're basically sort of internet archives, again, can be really useful, particularly if you're looking for sort of historic things. The Internet Archive Scholar has millions of digitized books, historic papers, web archives. The HathiTrust Digital Library, again, collects lots of different items. They're published in over 400 languages. So there are some really huge sources that we can search for free, essentially. Also, you might associate the publishers with content that's behind paywalls, but actually most of them do allow you to search and filter for open access things. I've put as well this functionality that they have in their searches. Often you find the free platforms may not allow you to do sort of more structured searches, or they might not have all the search filters and options that we have with the database. But what I would say is it's always worth looking at the help pages because they will always tell you exactly how you can search on that particular resource. So we're going to go to a demonstration now. I will just need to swap my screens over. I hope you can see the base search engine now. I hope that's swapped over. Maybe someone could say if it hasn't. So this is the base academic search engine that I mentioned. Now, obviously you can do a very basic search. I would always, though, even if you want to do something very quickly, I'd usually go into an advanced search because it just allows you a bit more control over what you're searching for. As you can see, we can't do much in the way of sort of structuring a search. It's not going to allow us to sort of add different concepts and things. So I would probably, as a start, I'd probably start looking in the titles just to get some very relevant research and then take it from there. So I'm going to use the phrase searching I mentioned. So intergenerational interventions. Okay. And you'll see where it says access, I can click on these. So I'm going to pick open access. So I only want to see the things I'm going to be able to access. You can see you can change the content providers. So we can go worldwide, or, you know, sometimes in our health work, we might be specifically looking for UK settings. So we could change it to that. Also, we can change the years that we're interested in if we wanted to look for the most recent search. Generally, as a rule, I tend to start very broad and then narrow it down if I need to, because I think if you put in lots of parameters at this stage, you often find that there's really not anything much at all. So yeah, I would start with a pretty broad search. So as you can see, I've looked for interventions in the title, so it's put TIT there. I only want open access stuff. So we've got 67 hits. So that's a really nice number to start with. They're obviously going to be very relevant, hopefully, because they have our concept in the title. So what it would do then, I would start having a look through those and then, start to sort of scope the literature about what's out there. They're sorted by relevance. You can change that if you wanted the newest first. And as we can see, that first one pretty much helps to answer our question. And there's various different refining you can do. So again, the year, the language, that type of thing. So yeah, I think base is a pretty good place to start. I think it's quite easy to search, but it only really allows us to do quite basic searching in terms of, putting together a search string. So that's base. Yes, we're going to look at ScienceDirect now. So this is, unfortunately today we haven't got time to look at all the sources. So I've just picked out a few key ones, but I would recommend, after the session, having a look for yourself. The best way you can learn is sort of having a practical go at some of these sources. So ScienceDirect is as you'll probably know, is a publisher of journals. Again, I just go to advanced search. I tend to just do that as a rule. As you can see, I've done some recent searches. And again, I found that we don't have a lot of options in terms of how we can structure the search. But as you can see, I'm going to copy this one. I think this worked. So a way around that, because it's not going to let me add any more boxes, I would put our concepts into brackets. So intergenerational is one concept, and then using the and, young or old or children or elderly, and well-being. Hopefully that will work. Okay, so yeah, it does work. So if it's not going to let you build boxes in that you can put your different terms in, structure it like that as a search string. Put your concepts into brackets. You can use your and your or. I actually might, it doesn't make any difference, but in terms of like reporting, I do tend to capitalize the operators because it does just make it a bit clearer for someone looking at it. So yeah, we're starting to get a little bit more control over how we search this source. And then in terms of open access, if on the left you could see refine by, there's an option for open access. Okay. So yeah, obviously that's a lot broader search. We've got about 2,000, but I probably would start by looking at the review articles. Yeah. So lots of options to filter your results with that one. Then Google Scholar. Google Scholar is great. It's really easy to search. It gives us access to lots of different things. Again, it's not great in terms of how we can structure searches. I think I just searched for intergenerational interventions in the first instance. But what it does do is once you get your results, you've got lots of different options. So this one is actually, it is actually the project I mentioned. If we look at that, we can start to talk about some of that citation searching. So you can see here, cited by 99 references. So if you click on that, straight away, you've potentially got another, 100 records to look at that may be directly relevant because they've cited that original piece of work. So yeah, that's a really good tip. They also have related articles. That sometimes works better than others. If you click on that, it will attempt to show you things that are similar to what you've looked for. And as you can see, it does do a pretty good job in that example. Also, if we talk about reference management, I think there might have been a session already on this program about Mendeley, I think it was. You can, if you go into your settings, you can get it so that you can import things directly into a reference management tool, which is useful. Generally, you have to do it one at a time, which is a bit of a bit annoying, but it's time consuming. But yeah, you have got that option. I'm just going to show you, actually, I think I was going to show you the settings option. There's a couple of things you can do that's really useful. So as I say, bibliography manager, you can click on show links, and then you've got options of how you want to export things. I think big text is compatible with Mendeley if that's what you're using. If you go into library links, you can actually search for your institution. You can see there I've got University of Sheffield added, and that will actually bring in content that you've got access to through your institution as well as the open access. So there's a couple of things I would recommend to enable you to use Google Scholar a bit more effectively in terms of managing what you find. Yeah, so yeah, that's just that. That's about the settings. Now, this is the big question that we are currently grappling with as information specialists. So, can artificial intelligence help us? I think at the moment we're at a bit of a crossroads. I think it does help in some ways, but in others it doesn't. We need to kind of be aware of the strengths and limitations of it, as with, using it for anything really. And also when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's sort of used as a catch-all for lots of different things. I think in terms of searching, we are looking at that yellow circle, which is the large language models. So it's things like Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini. There are some specific research ones as well that I'm going to mention. So yeah, we're looking at, can they help us find literature? So I will talk a little bit about that. So at the moment, we think maybe it's not a yes and it's not a no. I've put this up, which is about systematic reviews. And this study concluded that the large language models are on the rise, but they're not ready for use in systematic reviews. This table breaks down the steps of the systematic review. So I've just highlighted the search bit. And as you can see, these are numbers of studies. Most of them for search are in the non-promising box at the moment. Obviously, things change really quickly, but at the moment, we're sort of skeptical about whether it can actually help us with systematic searching. But there are some things it can do. If you know anything about large language models compared with database searching is just looking for words appearing. It doesn't know about the context or understand how terms might interact with each other, whereas large language models are based on semantic search. The systems can actually understand how the synonyms work in relation to each other, what the intent of the research is, rather than relying on exact keyword matches. I mentioned a few AI research assistants. I don't know if you've come across any of these. They all have a free version that you can use, but obviously subscription versions are available that allows access to more features. But I found you can do pretty much a lot with the free versions of these. We tend to use them in that scoping stage where we're looking at what's out there, we're trying to define our question, but we wouldn't rely on them to do all the searching for us. Oh, yes, I was just going to show you quickly. I'm not going to demonstrate live because they do very deep searches, so they take quite a long time to get the results. But I was just going to show you what the output looks like. So this is Elicit. Now, what I did was I put in my defined research question. It gave me a little overview. It's referenced some literature, which is real literature. Obviously, the actual project has come up. And then it asked me if I wanted a table comparing the intervention types, which it's done on the right. As you can see, it looks really impressive, but we would fact check that. We wouldn't just take that and use it. But it can give you a very quick overview of the literature at the start of a project. And also, we don't know how comprehensive it is. We don't know how much searching it's done. Obviously, the searches we would do, we have control over. We know where we're searching and we can report that transparently. Undermind is the one I use quite a lot for that scoping. Elicit tends to just take your question and go with it. Undermind will ask you follow-up questions. It sort of forces you to really structure what you're actually looking for, which can be quite helpful. And it will give you a little sort of top line kind of summary, and then it gives you lots of references. It works better for some topics than others. Again, we're very much sort of trial and error with this, finding our way, but the sort of messages, we use it, as a sort of supplementary searching technique, not relying on it to do our searches for us. Okay, I will go back to my slides now. So in terms of AI, what's it good at? What's it not good at? As you've seen, well, as you'll know, it obviously is very fast. It does that semantic searching that I mentioned, so it understands context. It can be very good for sort of visual citation mapping. Some of the tools will sort of do you a network of how sort of different subjects interlink to do with your research. It could quickly extract data, as you saw with the Elicit example. It put everything into a nice table. It does force you to think about the different multidisciplinary terminology, particularly the Undermind one, because it will ask you questions about what you mean. Also, I think we're seeing now that it's much easier to translate research. So we can start to bring in research from different languages much easier than we could before, which is obviously really good for sort of diversity of research and, reducing the risk of bias and things like that. As you'll know, particularly the more generic large language models like ChatGPT, it does hallucinate, it does make things up. I've had things where it's suggested references, and when I say, where will I find this reference? It says, oh, that's just an example. I just made it up. So you have to be careful of that. We talk about as well the sort of flattening effect. It's kind of designed to agree with you and help you and be nice to you. So it sometimes is quite surface level, and it doesn't really bring out things where there might be controversy or disagreement. As I say, we don't know where it searches, so we can't report what we've done transparently, which is really important in searching. And also, it will look for, it can tell you where there are research gaps, where there isn't research, but not the context of that and what is an actual gap and what is kind of, what are the gaps that need exploring. So our conclusion is always that we still need a human in the loop, and to use it sort of with caution, and as an assistant, never, as the author, we would never take what it gives us and just, use that. Okay, so for the last few minutes, we'll talk about, and it's especially relevant when we're thinking about AI, how we might evaluate what we find. So I think there's three things we tend to consider. So we definitely look at the methods of the research that we find. And going back to our research question, is it a piece of research that had a clearly defined research question, and the design of that research answers that question that it set out to answer? We would look for transparency of methods. We like to know exactly what people have done. And more recently, we like to see that data is available, open access if possible, so that we can, see the data for ourselves. The integrity of the publisher is becoming increasingly important to think about, because you'll probably be aware there's lots of predatory journals now where people are contacting researchers, asking them to pay to publish in their journal, and it's not kind of a sort of peer-reviewed journal. I would say if you come across a journal and you're not sure about it, check the journal repositories. So Directory of Open Access Journals, BASE as well is worth looking at for that, to check whether they index that journal or not. There's also when we think about sort of external validation of what we find, if we look at people who've cited the research, we can see in what context they've cited it. So citations are not always positive. Something could be heavily cited, from a negative point of view. So that's worth looking at who's cited that piece of research. Also monitoring retractions. So there's a website called Retraction Watch. You could check whether the research has actually subsequently been retracted. And now, I'm not sure about Mendeley, but a lot of the reference managers will highlight if things have been retracted, which is obviously very helpful. So our take-home messages, I know this has been a real quick tour of the sort of concepts and searching. But yeah, what I will say is, do have a go for yourselves. That's how you learn. That's how you find your way around things. So I would say the key things to remember from this session are that starting with a clear research question, spending time at the beginning, working out exactly what you're looking for, is really useful, and it does save time later on. Break your question down into its key concepts. Think of all the synonyms for your search terms, so the different ways different researchers might express the same concept, particularly where you're looking at multidisciplinary research. Always supplement database searching with additional techniques to make sure that you've comprehensively looked at lots of different ways of finding research, and particularly if your topic is something that's going to be in the grey literature, that will be very, very useful. If you're using AI, treat it as assistant zone as only. Always check its output and verify it and fact check it. And yeah, in relation to that, but in relation to all research, obviously check the quality of what you find. Yes, and I think that's the end of what I was going to talk about. We've got about 10 minutes. I'm happy to take any questions. I've left my contact details. I don't mind people contacting me with questions. And yeah, do have a look at the University of Sheffield web pages for further information. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my slides now so I can see you.
Okay, I'll be taking a few questions from the chat and
Okay.
I'll just read them out. You can respond
Yeah.
to them after. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll start with Mohammed Said, who's asking, what is the comparative effectiveness of supplementary searching methods versus data-based strategies in achieving comprehensive literature retrieval?
Yeah, it does depend on the topic. We would usually aim to find most things from database searching. I think we usually cite a piece of research which was about Medline specifically, so a health database, that about 80% of the literature can be found in Medline. Obviously, that depends on the efficacy of your search strategy. But yeah, it kind of depends on the topic and also what your purpose is. So I'm very much coming from the point of view that I'm usually doing systematic reviews, so that comprehensivity is really important. We don't want to be missing studies that might affect the outcome of that review. If it's something more rapid, you might limit the number of sources you search. If it's something to just get an idea, then obviously, some sort of quick database searches might be enough. So yeah, I would say balance the kind of purpose of why you're searching, the time you've got available, because if you haven't got a lot of time, doing a lot of grey literature searching, which does take time, it might not actually yield you much. And yeah, the grey literature very much depends on the topic. So for our intergenerational one, we just knew that there were lots of organizations doing that type of research or doing that type of activities. And they just weren't organizations that would be writing up in academic journals. It was, the purpose of them. So yeah, I would try and balance those things.
So we have another question from Owal Ali Omar, who's from the American University of Nigeria.
Yep.
He is currently working on his MSc thesis in information systems. So he's asking,
Okay.
could you advise on the most appropriate research approach for his study? For example, would a systematic literature review be suitable? And is it necessary to understand and use PRISMA?
Yeah, so generally, I would say, speaking from our university, thesis, the chapter about the literature would usually be a systematic literature review, which is what I talked about at the beginning. It wouldn't be as rigorous as a full systematic review, but we would use the principles certainly to search systematically. PRISMA, yeah. So for those that you don't know, when we do systematic reviews, there's a guidance to follow called PRISMA. I think it stands for Preferred Reporting of Systematic Reviews and Meta-analysis, I think. And you can Google it, it's freely available. It provides a checklist to follow. Now, one of the things it does, and I would say this is useful in any type of literature review, it has a flow diagram, which basically shows how much literature you started with, how much you were able to exclude just by the titles and abstracts, how many you needed to look at the full text, and then how many you actually ended up with. I think it's good because it's a structured process for you to follow and helps you manage your literature, but also it has that transparency for the people looking at your thesis. They can see, oh, you did a really good search, you've looked at all the literature, you've assessed what's going to be relevant and what isn't. So yeah, I think I wouldn't say you need to follow PRISMA to the letter, but I think the flow chart is really useful to adopt.
So we have a question from Dr. Neelan Umbreen, who is from RIU. With the emergence of AI-powered semantic search tools such as Semantic Scholar and Consensus, how do you envision the future of systematic retrieval? Will traditional Boolean search engine strategies remain the gold standard, or do you anticipate a hybrid approach becoming the norm?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it is really what we're grappling with at the moment. I think, I think for now that hybrid approach is the way to go. Obviously, open access has really come on in recent years, but there are still a lot of things that you would only find by searching databases. So I think a balance at the moment. I would find the AI most useful at the start, where I'm kind of scoping the literature, finding a few key papers so I can look at the terminology and I can figure out what my search might look at like. Also sharing with the researchers and saying, I found these papers. Are these the sorts of things that you're going to be looking for? Because that helps us structure the search. It's not great at coming up with search strategies. It does make a lot of mistakes, so I wouldn't rely on it for that. I have used it where I've done database searching, and then we needed to do more sort of targeted search for one specific area of the topic, and we didn't have a lot of time to do that. So we did a combination of, we used Undermind, we did a Google Scholar search, and I think we did a very quick search, a very, very focused search in one of the databases. And we used a combination of those things. So yeah, definitely, I think for the meantime, a hybrid approach. What will happen in the future? I don't know. I think we'll always need information specialists in some way to sort of navigate the literature and the sources, but it may change how and where we search. But yeah, I expect to be able to see my career out, I think.
Okay, so we have another question. It's from Dr. Ehsan Farooq, who's from REFA as well.
Yeah.
Multidisciplinary research requires searching diverse databases like Google Scholar, Medline, and IE Explorer, and so
Yeah.
on. What is
Yeah.
the best practice for adapting search syntax and control vocabularies without introducing any form of bias?
Yeah, it's a challenge because as people who sort of do a fair bit of searching will know, we tend to develop our search in one database, but it's not inconveniently, all databases work in a slightly different way. So there's always got to be some translation going on. I think some people have kind of looked at whether AI can help with this. Again, it does make mistakes, so I won't rely on it. I would usually take my search I've done. So in health, we tend to start with Medline because it's one of the biggest databases. I would take that search. I would look at in terms of the controlled vocabulary, so the sort of subject heading searching. So I realize I'm getting a little bit technical about health now. We'll have, so Medline has medical subject headings. It's like a catalogue of headings that describe the research. Other databases will have their equivalent. I would check those first. I wouldn't just use them from my original search because often they're not the same and it may just give you 0 and you don't know whether it's just that there's 0 or whether you've used the wrong subject heading. In terms of the syntax, in terms of the things like the truncation I was talking about with the little asterisks, that can vary across databases. I would always look at the help sections first because it usually gives you a really good overview of what the syntax is for that database. When you're searching a lot of different sources, and I've been doing this for years, it's really hard to remember them all per source. So yeah, just go to the help pages and they'll usually tell you what the specific syntax is for that database. But yeah, don't underestimate how long it'll take you to do all the search translation because yeah, it's quite a big job.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sutton, for this absolute masterclass in systematic retrieval. Thank you for our audience also for an engaging and analytical Q&A session. I believe some of you have questions which are very precise, and because some of you joined in a little later, you can also look back at the recording on the YouTube link. The link has already been shared in the chat. Just to wrap up today's session, we know this was an invaluable guide for search architecture, demonstrating, how Boolean logic and source evaluation can transform very chaotic literature research into a precise, systematic foundation for multidisciplinary inquiry. Personally, I felt that these insights about AI use were particularly useful as they also answer the questions that were asked in the previous 3 sessions, 4 sessions. Absolutely love the comparisons between the various search tools like Bayes and ScienceDirect. I think this is something that researchers really need to spend time on before they grasp. So this is a very good insight. I would like to express my deep gratitude to Dr. Anthea Sutton for sharing her time and expertise with us despite being so unwell. Thank you so much, Dr. Sutton. Thank you also to the dedicated participants for all of your energy and questions today. A big shout out to Fatma and Zarek who have been helping at the CLT end. They're part of the CLT team and have managed to, really make sure these sessions run seamlessly. Also to the thank you to the ITS team for their continuous behind the support behind the scenes support for our technical connections. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you on the 5th webinar. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.